It's the year 2026 and a brand new plague is taking over the world. No, it's not COVID 2.0, it's actually dragon media. We have dragon books, dragon movies, dragon games, dragon houses, and well, I'm doing this video mostly because of the last one. And of course, I'm taking advantage of this situation so I can talk about A Song of Ice and Fire. In this video, we'll be talking about the dragons of A Song of Ice and Fire and determining what we have already seen in the series and what might come out in the future and what probably still is in the series. Also, I'm gonna rank them on a tier list, so let me just explain to you what the ranks are. We have dragons that already exist, that in the books it's explicitly shown that they exist, that they're alive. We have dragons that like will come in the future, like be born or something. Then we have dragons that might have survived after the Dance of the Dragons. We're going a little bit back in time. Then we can only speculate because we can never be sure about things. And no, just no, they're not alive. Let's start with the easiest and most obvious ones. Daenerys' three dragons, Drogon, Rhaegal and Viserion. Like, they exist, they are the only dragons we see in the main series. So yeah, they already exist, we know that one. Next up we have ice dragons. Now I know, you probably think I'm making this up or that I'm being absurd. However, I think this is most likely to happen in some way. I'm not really sure how, but in some way the White Walkers can obtain an ice dragon. Now I'm not really sure how, maybe like kill one of the Daenerys dragons and resurrect it as a zombie, or maybe like reconstruct an ice dragon, or maybe get their hands on an egg and somehow make a ritual that creates their own versions of dragons. Now I know I sound absurd here, but let me explain. Throughout the series we see a lot of contradictory and opposites between ice and fire, and like the two sides have quite similar things but like in different ways. Like the Lord of Light has his fire worshippers and their blood magic. Meanwhile, the Great Order slash Night King slash Night King, we still don't know who controls the White Walkers or even if they're controlled, but basically the White Walkers most definitely worship something of their own, like their own race and culture. And then we have the Whites, which are the zombies that the White Walkers can raise. However, surprisingly enough, there's also something like zombies on the fire side, like Beric Dondarrion and Lady Stoneheart. Now, yes, these guys are technically still sentient, they're not zombies, but they're also undead, and they also seem to have some sort of like missing parts of their soul, just like how a zombie would. And the same thing can be said about dragons, because a lot of red priests refer to the dragons as being created by the Lord of Light. And also in the meantime, there's also myths about the existence of ice dragons, so I don't know, I think it just fits, and maybe this will be interesting to have when the long night comes. Okay, now we move on to the dragons that have survived after the Dance of the Dragons and determining whether any of them are still alive. First of all, Sheepstealer. This is a wild dragon, like I mean a dragon that was born alone without any Targaryens to train him. And yet somehow a random peasant girl named Netos somehow managed to bond with the dragon by simply just giving him sheep. Even though there's no like evidence that she has Valyrian blood. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that during the Dance to Dragons, Rhaenyra Targaryen declares Netos a traitor, so Netos is forced to run away with her dragon in the mountains of the Vale. And they basically just stay there for the remaining of the war until the reign of Aegon III. You see, there are some issues with the inheritance of the Eyrie. So basically Aegon sends Sir Robert Rowan along with 1,000 men, I think it was 1,000 men. But anyways, the point is that Sir Robert goes into the Vale to support Joffrey Arryn in his succession. However, when they stop to take a rest in a cave, they find Netos and her dragon, and the dragon burns or eats 16 men before flying further and deeper into the mountains, and we don't hear of them anymore. Now, many fans come to speculate that Sheepstealer probably is still alive even to the events of the main series. However, George R. R. Martin himself said that his dragons, like the dragons in his world, are not nomadic, meaning that they get born in one habitat and they prefer to live in that habitat. They only change locations when their rider is there. And it's been more than 100 years already, so most likely Nettles had died and Chipstealer is riderless again. So he would most likely just go back to Dragonstone. However, there's no report of him returning or being seen there. However, who knows, maybe in Fire and Blood Part 2 George R. R. Martin will give more information about that. I don't know, we can only speculate. Second, the Cannibal. Now this is another dragon that is surrounded by theories that just don't make sense when you consider what George R. R. Martin had said in his Beware the Butterflies post. Because many people think that the cannibal is still alive and he lives on an island called Skagus. Now, we know a bit about Skagus. We know that it's inhabited by wildling cannibals. We know that it's in the north and in a territory slightly beyond the wall. And also that it probably has unicorns. However, it doesn't make sense for there to be a dragon because one, the north isn't their home habitat, and second, the cannibal has nothing to do in this island. Just because it's an island inhabited by cannibals doesn't mean that a dragon named Cannibal will be there. Looking at this theory is like looking at that one image of lazy world building where you have continent of good people, continent of bad people, continent of neutral people, and just everyone who has this type of characteristics and personality are always in the same continent that has the exact same name, which doesn't make any sense. That's not how world building works. But Boris, Rickon Stark has a direwolf named Shaggy Dog, and he looks like the cannibal. He has black fur and green eyes, just like how the cannibal has black scales and green eyes. Dude, that's not how this works. Just because there is one animal with the same color pattern doesn't mean that another animal with the same color pattern will be in the same location. It just doesn't work like this. It's like saying that an albino monkey will be in the same location as a polar bear simply because they are both white. Now, considering that the cannibal had disappeared ever since the end of the Dance with Dragons, makes me believe, now this is a little bit of my own theory, it has very little proof, but I personally believe that the cannibal just fasted himself to death because his diet consisted of eating dragon corpses and dragon eggs, and considering that dragons began dying out, he just didn't get dragons to eat anymore, so he just starved to death or something like this. But since we mentioned Shaggy Dog, this actually reminded me of another theory I had, because Shaggy Dog and Cannibal have kind of similar looks and characteristics. Like Shaggy Dog has black fur and green eyes, and is also very feral and aggressive, kind of like the cannibal. The only difference being that Shaggy Dog is bonded to someone like it was bonded to a human, meanwhile the cannibal was feral throughout its entire lifetime, recorded lifetime. Which actually got me thinking, what if the cannibal died and somehow his spirit got reincarnated into Shaggy Dog, like, I don't know, some old god weird with magic or something like this. Which could be actually interesting. So technically Cannibal could still be alive, but not in the form many people theorize that he is. And then we have Silverwing, first ridden by good Queen Alysanne and then by Wolf the White. Spoilers for House of Dragon, you have 3 seconds to leave. During the Dance of Dragons, Wolf the White drinks poisoned wine and dies. So Silverwing is left without a rider, and it says in the text that she started living in Red Lake, which is in the Reach, which doesn't really make any sense, like she should return to Dragonstone instead. Unlike Sheepstera, whose location we knew, or Cannibal, who was intentionally made to be mysterious, Silverwing just disappears from the text. Like, last we hear of her, she lives in the Reach, she made her lair in Red Lake, and like, that's it, we don't hear of her ever again. Which, I think she's dead because the Reach is a very open and exposed area. Like, you cannot tell me that you cannot find a dragon in those fields. And those are all dragons from after the dance. And before I say, Boris, you missed 3 of them. No, I didn't, because their history has been recorded in detail. Not in exact detail, but at least we get the dates they were born and the dates they die. And in this video we are discussing who could have made it all the way to the main series. Okay, so now we move on to the most ancient dragon. No, I'm not talking about Beleriand the Black Dread. I'm talking about Emperor Orion's dragon. Now, who is this Emperor Orion and who is this dragon? We don't know much about them. What we know is that after the Doom of Valyria, some dragon lords managed to survive and escape. Of course, we know the Targaryens, they survived, and while they were others, they didn't survive as long as the Targaryens. Of course, these other dragon houses were either torn apart by a mob or poisoned, so they don't really matter. However, Orion decided to name himself the new Emperor of Valyria and started preparing his army. So, his army was ready, 30,000 men and one really big dragon. And what did Mr. Orion did with his army? No, he did not conquer Essos. Instead, he went into the ruins of Valyria and never came back. So why are we mentioning this random Valyrian guy? Well, because many fans theorize that his dragon is still alive in the ruins of Valyria and that he might actually be the creature that has wounded Balerion. However, if you've watched my previous video, there I mentioned that I think it's most likely that a fireworm killed Balerion. If you don't know what a fireworm is, think of it as like the Game of Thrones equivalent to a xenomorph. So if Balerion was wounded and poisoned slash leeched off of, then this means that this other dragon that has been lost in the ruins of Valyria didn't have any surviving chance. Like, if Balerion barely survived, then this guy is definitely dead. However, since this video is about the future of A Song of Ice and Fire as well, we have to take a look at dragon eggs and determining if any of them are easy to obtain and, you know, hatch. First up, new eggs. Now, I know you probably think that this is stupid because Daenerys dragons are all male, but let's not forget, dragons are said to be able to change their gender, so who knows, maybe they can reproduce and make eggs. And also another thing, many people want Daenerys dragons to be killed off, but I don't think this is what A Song of Ice and Fire stands off, or at least what Daenerys dragons stand for, because the whole point of these three existing is because magic and dragons return to, you know, the whole world of A Song of Ice and Fire, so it doesn't make sense for them to return just to be killed again. Second, eggs are dragonstone, because dragonstone is where dragons were reproducing and where the Targaryens always kept their dragon eggs, whether they were dough or not. However, after Robert's rebellion, dragonstone was given to Stannis Baratheon, but we never really hear what happened to these eggs. Did Stannis throw them out? Did he keep them stashed somewhere or something? Some people think that Stannis took some eggs from dragonstone all the way to the north, which could be interesting, but still this falls into the speculation category. Next, eggs at Winterfell. Before the beginning of the Dance of Dragons, Rhaenyra Targaryen sends her sons Jaehaerys and Lucerys to go negotiate with paramount lords around Westeros. And when Jaehaerys goes to the north, there is a theory that his dragon Vermax laid eggs there, but of course this is a little bit of a argument made there, because it said that Vermax was a male dragon, so it couldn't reproduce eggs, but as we just said, dragons are said to be able to change genders. However, it won't really make sense because there are already more than enough females at Dragonstone, so I don't see a reason for there to be a male dragon giving birth, unless it's like a reference to seahorses, because House Valerian's sigil is a seahorse. Question is, are these eggs going to ever hatch? We don't really know. Maybe they are frozen deep in the Winterfell crypts. Maybe Jon Snow will hatch a dragon from there, or maybe just entirely not, and they're just a theory that we will never see the conclusion of. Okay, so now spoilers for the future of some characters that are in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. You're being warned again. Okay, so during the reign of Aegon V, he decides that he wants to bring dragons back to the world. Well, at least he attempts to. He gathers his family at Summerhall, prepares pyromancers, wildfire, and 7 eggs, because, you know, the faith of the 7, in hopes that it will, at least one of the eggs or all of them will hatch. Of course, for those who know, this goes really terrible. Summerhall burns, collapses, almost the entire Targaryen line dies, with the exception of Jaehaerys, Aegon's son, alongside his family. However, we never hear what happened with these eggs, and we have to come to speculate what may have happened to them. Well, of course, if they hatched, it would be for nothing because the whole building collapsed on them. However, if they were kept as like stone, maybe they are dragon eggs somewhere in the ruins of Summerhall, being buried deep under the rubble. And finally, an egg at the wall. Why would there be an egg at the wall? I don't know, but there are two theories that may or may not be right. Our first candidate is Good Queen Arsene and her dragon Silverwing. There's a theory that her dragon had laid eggs at Castle Black. However, I find this most unlikely because, at least with the Vermax theory, it was backed up by an idea or a concept that there might be hot springs at Winterfell. However, with Castle Black, it cannot be like this because the wall is a giant block of ice. There is no hot springs there, it's like really cold. And as I discussed earlier, there is no way dragons could lay eggs or live in the north, it's not their home habitat. And then we have Lord Butterwhale's egg. Warning, this is spoilers for possibly season 3 of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Basically, there's this Lord Butterwhale who got an egg from Aegon IV. Now, we're not gonna go in detail why he got that egg. The important thing is that he offered the egg as a reward at a tourney, which was secretly turned out to be rigged and a planned preparation for a second Blackfire rebellion. Of course, the rebellion is taken down by Sir Duncan the Tall and Bloodraven, and there's a theory that Bloodraven actually stole Lord Butterwhale's egg, and then later on in the history, when he was sent to the Night's Watch, he took the egg with him and then afterwards beyond the wall. Which could be possible because in the Mystery Night we never really learn what happened with the egg. We just know it disappeared and that possibly a dwarf climbed through the toilets and stole it from Butterwhale's bedroom or office, I don't know. It's up for debate, but... And that's it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you disagree with me, feel free to type down in the comments. I'll always check them. And I wish you a very good day.